to Awesome Video Game Data. If you're not here to see this, you're in the wrong room. My name is Geoffrey Zatkin. I'm going to introduce myself, introduce what we're doing, and then hop right into data. We're going to be doing about 75 data slides in an hour today. So hold on to your seats. As I said, my name is Geoffrey Zatkin. I've had a split career. For my first 10 years in the game industry, I was a game designer, including having had the privilege of working on the original EverQuest team. Before that, I was an indie dev, though we weren't called that at the time. For my second 10 years in the industry, I founded, ran, owned, and have now moved on from EEDAR, which is the world's biggest video game market. Let me start again. The world's biggest video game specific market research firm. And at the beginning of my third decade in the game industry, I've started a new VR-focused startup called Experiment 7. This talk covers a broad range of industry trends. Some of these will be familiar to you who saw this last year or the year before that or the year before that. This is year number 6 of this talk. However, all of the numbers have been updated through the very end of 2016. So some of this is new and some of this is similar, but it's often good to know that some of the things are still the same in addition to what's actually changing. So EEDAR, one of their primary focuses is game attribution, or the DNA pieces that make up games. You can think of EEDAR as the Game Genome Project. They track most game attributes you can think of. And this takes a very large team. There's more than 40 full-time dedicated researchers, analysts, engineers, and QA professionals working to track about 100,000 commercially released games, gaming accessories, and hardware. And this covers pretty much every retail and digital console, handheld, PC, iOS and Android game that has ever reached the top 50 of any chart for the mobile stuff, and going back about 20 years for the console and PC stuff. Recently passed about 150 million unique data points, and they partner with a lot of people who do measurement data, sales, marketing, awareness, including NPD, who purchased EEDAR from Greg Short and I, the founders, last year. So all the data that you see here is collected by EEDAR. So that is the source. Everything is sourced down in the corner and integrated into EEDAR's system from some of the best-in-class measurement companies that we partner with. I am currently working as the creative director of Experiment 7, a studio I founded with a buddy of mine named Dimitri Desarides, and we're making VR games for our Magic Table platform. And we make some awesome table-based games that you play in VR with your friends from around the world. We have a game in the Oculus store and another one coming out in about a month, which is in an animated kind of wizard chess, battle chess inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. And if you happen to be an investor in this space, hey, come by and say hi. We're still closing around. So why am I giving this talk when I'm no longer at EEDAR? Well, GDC being GDC and being awesome, you have to submit for the talk so far in advance, I actually hadn't sold my company at the time. So I chatted with our CEO and I said, well, if the sale goes through, I'm going to come back. We're going to put one last one of these together and do it. So if you see this talk next year, it will be somebody other than me, but we have a couple of really great speakers and analysts at EEDAR still. So I hope the tradition carries on. And today, I'm going to tell you about some of the coolest things we've seen in the past year, backed up with data. So to get this talk, you do not have to take a picture every single slide, though you may if you like. Take a picture of that, send an email in, and you will get the deck in the mail in a couple of days. So I'm going to pause for a second for that. I will also show that slide again at the very, very end. So if you decide you want to take it then, go for it. Okay, here we go. So the gamers of today are entertainment consumers, and they're consuming entertainment on pretty much every possible medium. If you look at this point for the US, about 65% of the population has played a game in the recent past. We're taking pretty much every dedicated media device and turning it into a gaming population, or a gaming platform. And since last year was NA Europe focused, this year is more, NA Asia focused, this is more NA Europe focused, since we flip every year back and forth. So who games? If you look at the ASA survey starting from 2007, whoops, hold on, I'm a slide ahead. So this is homes with a gaming console. So at this point, according to the ASA, when we went up to about 2010, 2/3 of American households had a gaming console in them. And then they missed a year and they backed it back down a little bit because what they'd been doing was counting consoles as opposed to counting consoles per household. So about half of American households have a console in it, but on average, the households that do have a console have 2 of them in it. So there's a friggin' ton of consoles out there. In addition to that, a majority of US households own a device that can be used to play video games. So at this point, if you look at America, North America, and pretty much across through Europe, most households have some sort of device that can be used to access video gaming. And at the start of 2017, we have a lot of choices of where to game and a lot of hardware built specifically for that purpose. So this is showing, as a reminder that I forgot to say at the beginning, if you have a device that makes noise, like a cell phone, please silence it. They're taping. So hardware sales are very important, and this is showing hardware sales worldwide through the end of 2016. And hardware sales are important because this is what determines your total potential market. For example, with about 50 million PS4s sold worldwide, the theoretical maximum sales of any PS4 game you make would be 50 million, one for every PS4 in existence. Of course, there are ones, that's of course the maximum. Nobody ever hits the maximum. But, that is kind of why hardware is important. If you're trying to put out a game on something that sold 1,000 units total, the most copies you would sell would be 1,000. So the core 8th generation hardware, the PS4 and the Xbox One, are actually doing very well on sales. So how well? So what this graph shows is the generational hardware sales sorted not by calendar date, but by quarters since the initial hardware release. This lets us kind of compare apples to apples sales for 7th and 8th generation hardware. So the sales of 7th generation hardware, the 360, the PS3, and the Wii, are in blue, and the 8th generation, the Xbox One, the PS4, and the Wii U, are in gray. And you can see that the 7th generation is 36% higher, the blue line, than the gray line. However, an interesting thing about this is that we are including the Nintendo hardware. And the Wii hardware primarily targets non-core game players, who over the last generation, in a lot of cases, have been migrating from consoles onto web and social mobile experiences. So if you remove the Wii and the Wii U from the hardware line, and you look at the core consoles, the selling into the core market, you can see red is the 8th generation and yellow is the 7th generation, minus the Nintendo hardware. And at this point, you can see that at this point in the cycle, we've sold 34% more hardware into core consumers than the hardware we were selling last generation. So the consoles are actually ahead that are dedicated to the core consumer. And as I said, the more casual consumers have been moving to other platforms. And this is in a lot of cases true with the genres as well. So what we're looking at here, talking about the shift, is a shift from kind of a balanced portfolio across consoles of core and casual games to a more core-focused portfolio. So the numbers in blue are the percent of sales for the 7th generation consoles by genre, and we're only showing some of the genres here. And then gray is showing the 8th generation sales of those same genres. So you can see that some of the more casual genres are dropping down, kind of the mid-core are remaining static, and the core are increasing their number. And in the same way, the breakout genres on mobile are mobile-centric. Excuse me, I have the sniffles from the airplane. So what this shows here is the most played genres from a vast amount of surveys that we've done for basically adult gamers, age 18 plus. So blue is they only play that on mobile. Gray is they play it on mobile, PC, or console, and yellow is they play on PC or console. So you can kind of see this shift in genres, that some of them are very much mobile-centric and others are more the PC console-centric. And that being said, what is very important to realize is that most gamers play games on a variety of devices. There are almost no mobile gamers that only play games on phones. So we see that the gamers are playing games across a variety of devices, but they're playing different games depending upon what device they have handy at the time or the actual amount of time they have for playing. And we'll be going more into that later. But of course, from the previous numbers, we're not just talking about consoles and handheld. This shows platform sales worldwide, including bringing in PC and iOS devices, the iPad and the iPhone. So PC is a hard thing to measure because of the quantity of PCs. How many PCs have you owned across your lifetime? That makes it really hard to get an active install base. But this is up there, a very underreported PC hardware number, which is about 150 million, and I'm going to get back to where that number comes from later. So when we bring in the iPhone and the iPad, you can see a good amount of sales there. You may notice that these are lower than their worldwide sales numbers. So that, what we're showing here is 2-year hardware sales for the iPad and the iPhone. So that's 92 million iPads instead of the 350 million sold across lifetime, and the 447 million iPhones instead of the 1.1 billion iPhones sold life to date. And why? Well, because of data. So especially with phones, data shows that most people upgrade their phone every 18 to 24 months. So the average smartphone right now is about 6 months old, somewhere actually, in the 6 month to a 1 year range. So while technically there's 1.1 billion iPhones out there, if you take the last 2 years' sales, that's 447 million, that's kind of the active install base that you're looking at. And by the way, one of the things to note too is that this is 92 million iPads. Last year I was talking about 123 million in the 2-year range. So that number has actually gone down, where the iPhone number is actually up 47 million from last year when I was talking about it on the active 2-year range. And we'll get into that in a bit later as well. So why am I not showing Android? Well, Android fragmentation makes this a particularly difficult thing. I know I show this one every year, we always get a giggle, but Android's doing really well. There's a tremendous amount of phones out there. The problem is not every Android phone is powerful enough to play all games. And this makes it, again, very hard to do a market sizing on something when you have a variety of different devices in this sort of fragmentation. But what it really comes down to is there's a lot of dedicated hardware on which to play games. So speaking of dedicated hardware, VR got a lot of attention this year. We've had everything from skeptics to true believers, but a lot of it really comes down to when will people buy VR hardware and make VR hardware a thing? Well, the thing is starting. Blue is showing life-to-date sales of the high-end VR hardware, the PS4, the Oculus, and the Vive. Gray shows integrated mobile, the Gear VR and the Daydream, and the yellow shows Snap-in Mobile, excluding cardboard. There is a lot of cardboard out there. I heard a figure that was somewhere around 80 million, and it's just Google's done a very good job of distributing that at a very low price. The second graph shows rough life-to-date revenue for the hardware. The integrated mobile VR hardware is a bit lower than you might think because of the amount of Samsung Gears that came packaged in with their mobile devices. A lot of people basically picked it up for free on promotion. But we're starting to build a critical mass of VR hardware, enough to begin to make a profitable VR ecosystem. And like each generation of hardware and type of hardware before it, consoles, PC, mobile, it takes time to build an ecosystem. And people always wonder, will there be one, up until the point where suddenly everybody's like, oh, of course there is one, why did we ever wonder? And this is going to happen here as well, just like it's happened with every other dedicated piece of hardware out there. So speaking of hardware, the North American mobile market is maturing. We're actually beginning to see device saturation. At this point, more than 75% of North American adults own a smart device. And so there are fewer new device owners entering the market year on year. So what we're seeing here in blue is population that owns a smartphone or tablet, and in gray is population that plays games on their smartphone or tablet. And so what you're seeing is that decrease on the line, less and less new people getting it because we're hitting the saturation. The gaming population is still actually increasing faster than the hardware adoption. So we haven't hit saturation on that yet, but it is slowing down. Gamers as a percent of the population is still growing, but that being said, it is mathematically impossible to continue growing the percentage increase forever. And what that means in a lot of cases too is we need to get better about treating and acquiring a lot of our mobile users because we don't have an infinite amount of them to flip through and burn and just grab the next batch. So dual device ownership is still very strong and strongly associated with revenue in North American and European markets, as many mobile users opt to play on both tablets and smartphone devices. And this is critical because a large percent of the revenue comes in from users who own both. At this point, 51% of active mobile gamers own both a smartphone and a tablet, and they generate 60% of the revenue. That being said, this is down from 61% owned both last year, and they generated 70% of the revenue. Between 2015 and 16, tablet usage by adult mobile gamers has declined from 70% in 2015 to 59% this year. And a lot of this is because of the availability of large screen smartphone options. Basically, we now have ones that are big enough that people use that instead of going up to a full tablet. That being said, the duo owners still do generate the vast majority of the revenue. And in a lot of cases for tablets, where it had previously seen more mixed use, the tablet is becoming more commonly a living room device now. So if we look at Who Games, excuse me, let me take a sip. The demographic of people that game in America and in Europe and in actually all of North America is a lot older than most people think. The average game of the US gamer, according to the ESA, rose from 29 years old in 2004 to 37 in 2011, and then we had a dip when they started measuring mobile. And that dropped the age, but then it shot it right back up as people besides children started playing games on them, and it kind of permeated the ecosystem. So, this is great. We've continued to expand the market by adding game players, and average age of 35 is a very healthy thing, considering the lifespan of people in the North American states. And if you look at the age distribution here, blue is 18 and under, gray is 18 to 35, yellow is 36 to 39, and red is 50 plus. So yes, there are almost as many 50 plus gamers as gamers under the age of 18, which is again, fantastic. We have a well-distributed age demographic of game players in North America, and this represents a really large market expansion in our consumer base. There's been a long-standing myth that video games are for children. Games in America have never been for children, at least in the past decade. Children like to play games in the same way that children like movies and TVs and books and music, but games are another form of entertainment medium, and they've permeated our culture, and they're now played by pretty much everybody on a very wide variety of devices. If we look at mobile, kind of focusing down on some of this, the mobile market is also shifting older year on year. And we believe this is primarily due to an influx of late adopters coming into the market. And late adopters tend to be older and less tech savvy as part of the population. So blue here this is showing total market size on age. Excuse me. Let me look at my graph. This is showing age by groupings of people on how they pay for mobile. So on the left are non-payers, people who never pay any money for this. And you can see blue is 2014, gray is 15, yellow is 2016. The age has gone up from 34 to 41. Payers are people who basically on a yearly basis for their entire mobile spending habit spend between a penny and $99.99. And heavy payers pay $100 or more across their total gaming habit per year. And again, this is just on the mobile spend. This doesn't count their console and their PC and their web and everything else. So this is purely mobile. You can see the age of the heavy payers has remained pretty constant, while the non-payers and the payers have gone up. And again, this is a lot due to the late adopter syndrome. And we'll get more into that later. So if we go back and we look at the gender, returning to Who Games, the ratio of male to female gamers has definitely changed over time, and it bounces around a lot. And this is the ESA numbers, the EEDAR numbers are very close, but you can see we've always kind of maintained about a 60-40 ratio, and it creeps up a little bit and creeps back down, but there have been more women playing games longer than most people think. This is also really impressive here because with the quantity of new players coming into the market, this could have been a radically different story. This could have been, only this age came into the market or only this gender came into the market, but we've seen it, pretty much permeate the culture, going, both wide and deep. And again, that points to a very healthy ecosystem of, people who like games and are willing to come into the gaming ecosystem and hopefully pay all of our salaries so we can go make more games. However, that being said, men and women tend to play on different pieces of hardware. Blue is boys, purple is girls, and you can see here on mobile there are more female gamers than there are male gamers, outnumbering. But you go up to handheld, a little more male, console more male, PC primarily. And this always shifts around a bit over time, but at this point, if you're looking, there are more women on mobile and there are more men on PC. If you kind of look at the payer segments on this, so again, blue 14, gray 2015, yellow 2016, going into the female gamers on this. On the non-paying segment, they've remained pretty steady. Same on the payers. Last year, the women shot up to be 50% of the heavy payers. That's considered the whale category. And this was because for one of the first times with Kim Kardashian and a couple of other things, we actually saw dedicated offerings made that started addressing pieces of the market that hadn't been significantly addressed and monetized before. However, the lowering, which I'll get into in a minute, is due to the fact that, and actually I'll get into this more in another slide, we've seen an increase this year on the number of people who are kind of the top of the payer category moving just into the heavy payer category. And those were primarily men. So while the women are still paying in the heavy category, this group of people who kind of just moved over was primarily male, leaving a lot of the women at kind of the top of the payer category. And so that lowered percentage-wise. And so, you know, that being said, we've seen that women like men will pay for the games they like. And, you know, this just means make games that people like, or, you know, target specific groupings that people will like. So a quick note on game nomenclature. A SKU, or a shopkeeping unit, is what you'd actually buy in a retail or a digital store. So that's Angry Birds HG, GTA Game of the Year Edition, the Assassin's Creed Collector Edition, Rock Band with or without instruments. And most games release multiple SKUs. You know, you want to put out your regular edition, your Game of the Year, you want to put it out on different platforms. So if I say that something's a SKU, that means the individual game that came out. If I say, hey, you know, this was Angry Birds on Apple, you know, for the original one, that would have meant 4 games rolled into one if we're counting. And this is important because I'm going to be showing counting numbers. If I say a distinct game like Angry Birds, that means Angry Birds on every platform it came out with every single SKU released all rolled into one, where the franchise would be Angry Birds. This, of course, doesn't count regionalization, which adds a whole bunch of different things to this. And this is, of course, why your accounting department hates you. So looking at games and game count, we're going to be talking about platform for the next couple ones, which is, hey, if it came out on Apple and there were 4 SKUs, that only counts as 1 game. So looking at the number of games released for the past few years, we've been in the middle of a renaissance of game creation. You know, while the barriers to making a AAA or S-tier game have arguably never been higher, the barriers for small teams to create games of quality have perhaps never been lower. So this is the quantity of retail console, handheld, and PC games released at a platform level, so all the SKUs rolled into one, and you can see that it's getting lower. And this is not something you'd expect because I'm leaving out a huge thing here. So let me change this axis from 2,000 up to 7,000, and it looks like this. And let's say instead of retail games, let's say retail and digital, console, handheld, and PC. And at this point, it looks something more like that. So yeah, that is a lot of games, and yes, we had almost 6,500 games come out last year just for console, PC, and handheld. And the question is, where are all these games coming from? So in blue, we have the 7th generation consoles, Xbox, 360, PS3, Wii. Gray is 8th gen, yellow is handheld, and red is PC. And yes, that is almost entirely Steam. There were about 5,000 games released on Steam last year. Here, let me break this out. This is what Steam has looked like. In 2014, there were 1,500 games. In 2015, there were 3,400. In 2016, 4,600 games released. More games came out on Steam last year than the entire physical and digital catalog of every 7th generation console, so the 360, the PS3, and the Wii, and 8th generation console, the Xbox One, the PS4, and the Wii U, and all of the handheld, like the Game Boy, or man, I can't even think today, the Vita, and all of that put together. If you put all that together, more games came out on Steam last year than that entire catalog. And last year, so let's see, Steam, they announced about 15 years ago at GDC actually, over 150 million active users. Remember when I said it was hard to gauge a PC hardware install base? Well, if you assume that there's at least 1 PC for every Steam active user, you get at least 150 million active gaming PCs out there. So back to games released. So we also now have bite-sized gaming devices in every pocket, which is great. And it is now socially acceptable to play a game just about anywhere, anytime. We have become a gaming culture. You know, when I was growing up, nobody played games in bars. Nobody played games in coffee shops. You know, nobody played games on the bus. Well, maybe on the bus. But you know, there's obviously a tremendous amount of iPhone and Android games released every year. And I've shown in past years, we've talked about the discovery problem. You know, there were more than 100,000, you know, just iOS games released in North America alone. That, however, is a very impractical number because the majority of those games sell nothing. So the numbers I'm showing for the next chart are iOS and Android games that basically hit a top 50 chart, meaning that they had some chance of making revenue. So what we're gonna look at now is if we say, okay, if we take the total release of everything that came out, what were the percentages? So this is on quantity of games added up against each other. 7th gen, which is sunsetting, 1%. 8th gen, 15, handheld, 2%. PC, 58% of the games released. And then you get iOS and Android at the 10 and 14. But again, those are only basically games that hit a top 50 of any of the charts during the entire year. So that is still a tremendous amount of games, and those are the ones that actually had, again, a chance of selling. So a point of fascination for me also on the shift between the 7th and 8th generation consoles has been going from physical to a fully integrated digital strategy. So blue is physical-only game releases. Gray is digital-only releases, and yellow is games released both physically and digitally on a console. And as you can actually see here the peak of physical game releases and the constant rise of digitally released games. This kind of sums it up here. And at this point, unless your game on a console has a mandatory physical component or peripheral, it is pretty much always released digitally. There are no more physical-only released games of this type. You can look at that tiny little blue bar at the bottom of 2016. Going along with kind of some of the surprising bits on the trends, another one has been, for console, the quantity of publishers, which is here shown in blue, has increased over the past decade. So blue is publishers, gray is games on console, and the yellow line is games per publisher. So this is surprising, I say, because there's been a massive consolidation in the mid and the top tier publisher ranks. You would expect to see, therefore, fewer publishers over time with the buyouts and acquisitions. The consolidation has been offset, however, by the rise of the digital-only games and the low barriers to entry for digital publishers. So you can, again, kind of see the quantity of games and going down, and the yellow line is the average number of games released per publisher, which you can see has declined. And most publishers at this point are concentrating on fewer, better financed, and better marketed titles. If we showed only the major publishers here, the difference would be significantly more pronounced. Gone are the days when a single large publisher would have a slate of, say, 20+ premium games all coming out in one year. Again, the trend is less games per, but bigger development budgets and bigger marketing budgets. So video game sales, so these are games. This isn't counting the hardware or the peripherals. As reported by NPD, is about a $16.5 billion a year industry just in the US. And there's acknowledgement that this is a little bit of an underreported number, but this is really close. And of course, the games are not the only thing in the ecosystem. We also do have the hardware and the accessories. And together it adds up to about $23.5 billion, again, just in the US. Mobile sales are also increasing. This year we had about $6.1 billion of mobile sales in North America. And this makes up, a larger percent of the market than ever before. About a third of the revenue is coming in from that. And across pretty much every region, mobile gamers tend to engage similarly with mobile games, with about half of the players spending nothing on games and a very small amount of them spending a lot. And this has remained pretty consistent year on year in North America. And we see, this backing similar trends across Asia and Europe. So blue here is 2014. And this is the mobile gamer, this is actually the number of active mobile gamers. Gray is 2015, yellow is 2016. And they're bucketed into the non-payers, payers, and heavy payers. And a couple interesting patterns of note here. Much of the market growth is happening on the non-payer end, and this is again mostly tied to the late adopter, non-traditional gamers coming in. And despite the smaller proportion of, the payers still contribute very significantly to the revenue. We also see here that the average spend of payers and heavy payers is down from 2015, which is in the yellow, to 2016 in green, but the population has increased. So the total population of heavy payers actually went up, almost 50%, but the new heavy payers just edging their way in aren't the super whales. These are guys who've moved from, say, spending $90 a year to maybe $120 a year, as opposed to the $500 to $1,000 a year kind of at the top. So more people are in the category, and this category is making more money in total, but there's less money per average one because some people kind of just moved up over the line. So again, more people in total, generating a bit less on average, but more money for the category. When you look at monetizing, to kind of break it out again, just for percent of revenue, non-payers obviously bring in 0% of the revenue because they are non-payers. The moderate payers bring in 41% of the revenue, or excuse me, 45% of the revenue brought in by 41% of the population. And this is actually down. Last year, it was 45% of the ecosystem brought in 50% of the revenue. And this year for the heavy payers, which last year were about 5% of the ecosystem, they're now 7%, and we've gone from 50% to 55% of the revenue. So people are basically beginning to be okay with spending more money, or a larger percent of the population is okay spending more money in the mobile markets than ever before, which again is great for our ecosystem. There is a heavy overlap between people who play games a lot and people who pay for the games a lot. So on the left-hand side in purple, we have light payers, or we have players. In the top, the lightest one is light players, less than an hour a week, going down to the middle of moderate players, 1 to 5 hours a week, and heavy players for mobile. And again, this is only their mobile playing time of 5 hours plus a week. Across the top, you can see the non-payers at 0, the payers at 99 cents to $100 a year, and the heavy payers at 100 plus. And you can kind of look at the heavy player amount, and you see that almost none of them are light amount of players. They all play for significant amounts of time, and the heaviest monetizing group plays for the longest. And again, this is very important as you're designing your game. People who play more tend to pay more. That being said, there's also still a difference by gender. And as usual, the men are the blue and the women are the purple. And if we look at the heavy players, there is close to gender parity. If we look at the heavy payers, because of the shift from last year, men are now outnumbering the women again. And you can also kind of see the average age going along there. So cross-platform ownership is very high in Western markets. So this is looking at people who play games on phone and where else they play games. So if you look at the entire mobile gaming population of 18 plus, only 24% play games only on their phones. You get then the 24% for mobile PC, 30% for mobile PC and console, and 22% for mobile console. And a lot of the people that are mobile only are some of these late adopters who are just getting in and basically didn't grow up playing games in other places, who then moved into cell phones because they were and tablets because they were convenient for playing. And again, almost all of the heavy, why do I even have that note there? If you look at the PC market, it's actually very similar, although it's a little more skewed. And this is slightly older data, but again, non-payers just below 50%, you get the moderate payers, and you get the heavy payers. And on PC, the 99th percentile as a call-out accounts for 15% of the generated revenue. So there are even more super whales in PC in some cases than there are in mobile. PC revenue from the total monetization of the PC ecosystem has been steadily increasing over the past few years. So in blue, you see PC retail, or physical. In gray, you see digital retail, and in yellow, you see free-to-play. And at this point, physical PC is pretty much non-existent. PC has moved entirely into the digital ecosystem. And a lot of this is spearheaded by outstanding titles like League of Legends and online stores like Steam. You saw the Steam numbers going up. But again, a majority of the PC ecosystem is now digital. So part of this talk used to be, with all the talk on PC and mobile, why do I even still talk about console? And then I'd show you pictures of all of the billion-dollar console games and say, because they generate and this is a technical term, metric fuck ton of money. So I rearranged it this year for a new message. There's a lot of great ways to sell games. And some games cost significantly less to develop. And some games provide enough of an experience that people will pay $60 upfront for them. But it's not just consoles. If you have a widely adopted hardware platform, i.e. audience, people will figure out how to sell to that audience. And this is why Apple and Android do so well. They have a widely adopted hardware platform. And a great game with a strong consumer value proposition and the correct monetization method can do very well on mobile, tablet, PC, console. So we have billion-dollar HD games, console and PC, that are both premium and free-to-play, and billion-dollar free-to-play mobile games. What we haven't seen yet is a billion-dollar premium mobile title. you can see one of the areas of that square is empty. So as a publisher or developer, when you're looking at the game industry, it's very, very easy to become myopic and focus only on what you and your team is doing, or the region you're doing it in, or the customers you're selling to. But the game industry has a tremendous ability to scale to new hardware, to new features, to new business models. And rarely do the old ones die off as quickly as predicted, or in some cases die off at all. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard mobile is dead in my 21 years in the industry, or PC is dead, or console is dead, or hey, wait, now everything is PC, or everything's console, or everything's subscription, or everything's free to play. No. Everything just keeps going and expanding out, which again is great for the market. It means we get to all keep making things and hopefully get a paycheck. So speaking of dying off, many people are wondering when retail games will die off. And the answer is actually not very soon. So this is the revenue split of games released simultaneously in physical and digital formats on basically core consoles. And this graph, so you can see in 2016, 75% of the revenue of these games came in from physical sales. This might have been a physical sale ordered digitally, buying it off Amazon, but this is buying a copy that you could stick in to your device. 25% digital sales. And this has grown significantly from 2005, when 97% was physical and 3% were digital. But it's still much less than most people believe, and has the potential actually not to increase dramatically anytime soon. And let me tell you 3 reasons why. A, these are big games, a lot of them, and the internet infrastructure in North America is not amazing. You know, we're gonna have to, if you want to be a digital consumer, you need a very strong digital backbone going across the country and the ability to get these games quickly. Number 2 is digital gifting is still really hard. If my mom wants to give me a game on the Xbox, or my wife wants to give me a game on the PlayStation, or anything like that, or I want to go to my friend's bachelor party and give him a game, this is still a very hard thing to do. And until we can reduce the friction and make it super easy for basically non-traditional gamers to gift as gaming, there is still a lot of games that get bought as gifts. Number 3, a lot of these kind of gamers like to sell their games back, and they can't do that with digital copies. And so that also is preventing this from getting more integrated. That being said, if you look at total digital sales, which we see in blue, they have at this point passed total physical sales, which we see in gray. And for this measurement, digital sales include digital game sales, subscriptions, DLC, mobile apps, and social network gaming. So kind of the entire ecosystem of it. So a few slides ago, I showed how the quantity of games per publisher was decreasing, and more publishers were looking to invest more significantly, both in development and marketing budgets on the games they released. And this has actually reversed some of the market consolidation trends we saw over the past few years, but the top games still disproportionately outperform the more modest games. What we're looking at here is physical and digital console. So yellow is the percent of revenue for all of the sales generated by the top 2% of the games. Gray is the top 10% and blue is the top 50%. So the top 50% of the games bring in about 99% of the revenue. And you can see the top 10% of the games are bringing in right around 65% of the revenue. And the top 2% are bringing in just under 30% of the revenue. And this is actually a little better than it used to be, and the categories are moving up again because people are putting more money, or the bigger publishers, more money, fewer titles, which means there are more titles than just the top 2% now. You can kind of see that little dip in there. Going along with that, the average, hold on, did I skip a slide? There we go, I did. So looking at 8th generation retail console, 12% of the titles have at this point generated 75% of the revenue since 2012. And this is actually up from 2008 to 2014 when it was 8% of the titles generating 75% of the revenue. So again, more people investing more money in marketing in these kinds of games. In a lot of cases, this really is. The middle on the retail market is disappearing. We're basically pushing up and we're pushing down. Kind of going along with that, the average quality, though, has remained fairly consistent. We haven't seen big spikes. That dip, by the way, in 2007 and 6 was the Wii, when basically there was so much shovelware that got shoved onto the Wii that it lowered the entire review score average of the industry by a couple of percentage points. It was, surprising to everybody. This, by the way, the 70 number is about 10 points under the magic number you want. 80 is the new 90. 80 basically is the point where people will buy DLC for your game, where they'll buy expansions, etc. 80 is kind of the cutoff in consumers at this point for the good enough game. And it really comes down to people don't buy more of a game that they don't like. And if you're kind of looking for your quality bar, it's 80. That's where you want to be. So 10 points over the industry average.
What do you attribute the 69 to? The frequent drop to 2016?
There's just variance every year, honestly. You know, you get a couple titles that do particularly well or particularly poorly. But the question was, what do I attribute the slight drop in? And again, it's seasonal and yearly variance. There wasn't like all the games this year sucked or they were all better. One of the interesting things kind of going along with that is the quantity of games receiving a review score. So this is total count of retail and digital console games getting a review score in also buckets. Blue is less than 60, gray is the 60s, yellow 70s, red 80s, and purple 90s for review scores received. And you can see there was that kind of dip for a couple of years. And that coincided kind of with the initial boom in mobile, when there were a lot more people kind of looking at that. But it has gone back up. And what is interesting, though, is remember that quantity of game graph I showed you? How many more games are coming out? And so this is actually the percent of games on consoles that come out without a review score. And that doesn't mean nobody reviewed it. We count our review scores kind of like Metacritic and Game Rankings, where it has to get at least a couple from basically sites of above a certain, I'll just say, reputation. So these aren't individual blogs. But if you look at digital-only games, we're still averaging just under half of them get no review score. And again, this is just the quantity that come out. Where the reviewers aren't obviously reviewing as many of the physical edition games as they used to. You know, it used to be only 3% didn't get a review. In 2016, we're up to 22%. But they're doing a pretty good job keeping up, again, considering just the fire hose of games that are now coming out and they're having to keep up with. So kind of going along with reviews and review scores, advertising matters. There's a lot of development teams that think if you make a good game, people will come and buy it. And as a developer, I used to think that, and I don't anymore. So without good marketing, your game may do well, but it will never do as well as it could have, and usually substantially less. So I've put two factors up on the screen: a market spend and review score. So in this case, we're going to proxy review score as a shorthand for game quality and polish. And if you wonder why, you can look at my past GDC talks, but there is a direct correlation between review score and unit sales. And it's a hockey stick curve. Higher your score, the more you get. So you can look it up in the vault. This is a little bit updated methodology since I last showed it. This is showing 8th gen console first 3 months of revenue, which is when a majority of it comes in. But this holds true across pretty much every platform, every hardware, every type of game. So what we have here is on the bottom is review score, and we put them into buckets. Bottom third of review scores, middle third, and top third. And on the left, on the yellow, going up and down, the bottom third of market spend, the middle third, and the top third. So if we take out the middle buckets, we're left with, hey, bottom review, bottom marketing, which is where you don't want to be, and top third and top third. So if you look at the unit sales, you can see there is a huge difference between the bottom and the top, or the bottom thirds, top third, top thirds. You know, on average, the bottom brought in 6% of the first 3 month revenue of what the top group did. But this then leaves the question. If you had to choose between your game getting, you know, top third review scores and bottom marketing, or top third marketing and bottom third review scores, which would you do better with? And the answer is you would do about twice as well with good marketing. And this, again, goes back to that quantity of games coming out. There are so many games coming out that if you don't have marketing, nobody hears about your game, which means that nobody buys it. And this doesn't mean you have to go out and do traditional marketing, though that helps. What this means is people have to have a way of discovering your game. And that one of the ways you do that is through marketing. And you know, you can always bet on going viral, but that's a bad bet to bet your entire game's success on. So if you look at direct media spend, at this point, 9% of the retail titles account for about 75% of the direct media marketing since 2012. And this was actually the exact same percentage as last year and down from the year before where it was 13%. This is, however, much higher than in kind of the 2008 to 14, where only 6% of the titles accounted for this. So again, publishers, less games per publisher, more marketing spend, more development spend on it. So switching back over to mobile for a bit, so if you compare across regions, we see that mobile gamers are largely playing for many of the same reasons, and these tend to revolve around two key themes: accessibility and convenience. And this ties back to the mobile gaming experiences that have been successful, those that require a very limited attention span and time to play, can be played and fit into a variety of circumstances. And in many ways at this point, we feel that mobile's kind of found its niche as an experience that fits into a network of other gaming experiences and is most successful when it aligns with these gamer expectations of bite-sized gaming experiences rather than trying to shoehorn a more core experience that would be better suited for other hardware or other platforms. And these motivations tend to be very different from PC console motivations, which honestly tend to focus more on entertainment factors and less on convenience, session length, and portability. So discovery is how people find out about a game. This is a combination of promotion and traditional marketing and PR and cross-platform and incentivized installs and internet marketing and editorial coverage and social media and reviews and buzz and viral. You know, how do people hear about your game? And again, if you look at the quantity of games coming out, you know, discovery is a huge thing. It's vital to every game. And over the past few years, consumers have become a lot more passive in their sources of discovery and much less active on the storefront. You know, ads are playing a key role in the path of discovery, but notably only when they're being consumed on the mobile devices themselves, you know, as with social media or ads for other game apps. And, you know, there is a if you have a disconnect between the consumption of the ad and the actual process of downloading the game, say with like print or TV, it does undercut the effectiveness of the ad as a discovery tool. Mobile gamers are also showing a clear preference for more direct social recommendations, again, allowing for kind of the more passive discovery. And then again, this makes a great deal of sense as the players are finding the combined elements of an overcrowded market where the iterative experience is intimidating, and we're also not seeing a lot of movement kind of in the top of the charts. And so a lot of these performers, people have already decided, am I going to play that game or not? And that makes, you know, it kind of interesting finding good options. So engagement are basically the different reasons people decide to actually acquire the game or engage with it. And on the whole, players for mobile emphasize quick indicators of suitability and quality when deciding to play. And consistent with the past couple years, price and genre continue to be the single most critical elements in making a download or play decision. You know, this basically suggests that players look to see, is this a business model that fits with the kind of game they're looking to play? And, you know, free downloads are particularly attractive across some genres, and premium models, you know, being justified on others. And the same for genre. If a game isn't the type of game you like to play, there's very little chance of you engaging with it. You know, I don't really like racing games. No matter how awesome the racing game is, I'm probably not going to download it, even if it's free, because that's not the kind of game I play, with this vast amount coming out of the games I could be playing. And although social sources are critical to learning about new games, they do play somewhat less of a role in actually deciding to play or, you know, engage with the game. You know, other indicators of quality are a much bigger role. And players basically also prefer to know that the masses enjoy a game rather than a specific person. So ads on the everybody likes this and is playing it once your friend has told you about it is actually more suitable than my friend Bob likes this game. So churn, or players leaving the game, is of course very important to the lifetime value of a user. And a key factor across all regions is loss of interest. Players churn because of lack of compelling metagame. This is followed closely by friction, both on required spending and on game progress. And as always, remember, there are plenty of really good games out there. And if a player perceives that the game they are playing is not as good as other games out there, they might leave for a perceived better experience. So perception in your game is very important. So what we're looking at here is mobile genre revenue year on year by revenue change, with green being increases in revenue and red being decreases in revenue for mobile genres. And, you know, tying this into kind of a general pattern towards, you know, mobile market stabilization, Mobile game players, again, accessibility and convenience, and we're seeing the strongest growth among those types of experiences, which have done the best job of embracing and implementing these features. Also especially evident again this year is the power of brand. Clash Royale and Pokemon Go both drove massive growth in their respective subgenres. Let me actually expand this chart out to show the full growth that Clash Royale brought to the RTS tower defense subgenre. Also impressive is that combat city builders such as Clash of Clans remained flat considering their massive growth over the past year or two. We haven't seen the decline in that. Also, of note for kind of the ones doing well is looking at how carefully they navigate the Western pay-to-win stigma on how they do their monetization. So if we look at the top growers, those that have been doing an especially good job of aligning their business models with gameplay, noting what should appeal broadly or deeply, and generating compelling core content loops that keep gamers coming back for daily check-ins, kind of evolving and adding in over time, those are the ones that have been doing really well this year. The ones that have decreased the most are the ones that have struggled to innovate or honestly to make their gameplay mobile friendly or to implement free-to-play well. And while there is a Western pay-to-win stigma, Western players are okay with spending money to progress more quickly. So, this was a survey on where are you most likely to consider, when are you most likely to consider spending money on a mobile game? And surveyed, thousands of people. So other top factors include accessing new content and experiences, things on sale or discount, and the ability to be more competitive. And again, it's that fine line between more competitive and play to win that you have to tiptoe carefully to avoid the stigma while still being able to monetize on top of that. Another interesting thing to note is that these are, by the way, let me start that again. Another interesting thing is that these are the top genres that people say they play, not pay, and that these are not necessarily the top grossing ones. So these survey results came from a question to identify your top 5 most actively played genres on mobile for the past 6 months. And so while most people played a wide variety of genres, they did not necessarily monetize on this wide variety of genres, with one exception here, slots. And while slots didn't necessarily tend to top most of the monthly charts, in aggregate they were very widely played. This was another big growth genre, which was slots. And now my yearly Kickstarter update. So Kickstarter is, probably the most well-known of the crowdfunding sites. It's become a thing over the past few years, and it gives small studios a way out of relying exclusively on big publishers. The indie movement, crowdfunding, finance. So Kickstarter at this point has had $2.85 billion pledged since inception, with almost $600 million going to the game category on over 29,000 game projects. It is an interesting proposition, and it's no secret that most developers usually ask for less money than they actually need to make the game, usually substantially less money. But it does give them upfront money for development and some leverage to go to a publisher later. Hey, look at how awesome our Kickstarter was. We asked for this much and we got this much. You're kind of pre-selling part of your game. But there's also been another nickname, which is, this is the kick finisher model. We've seen more of this year and last year, which is where teams take an almost complete game, put it up on Kickstarter to get kind of their last little bit of revenue, or in some cases don't even care about the revenue, but use it as a marketing opportunity or the ability to pre-sell a certain quantity of units for their game and engage their community earlier. So if we look at gaming projects on Kickstarter, about 1/3 get successfully funded. This year it was 34%, last year it was 33%, the year before that it was 34%. It's remained pretty consistent with a 1% bounce rate back and forth. And kind of speaking of the money, this is the distribution of successfully funded Kickstarter titles. To date, there have been 76 games as of the beginning of February that have done more than $1 million in raise. And this is up 18 from last year when there were 58 games that had done $1 million or more. We also added 178 games to the $100,000 to $1 million range, which is 5 more than the increase from the year before. This being said, doing a Kickstarter is getting harder and harder because we have increasing degrees of polish that are being required and consumers are getting more sophisticated on what they fund. And again, this is especially true because we're seeing teams bringing in almost finished games into Kickstarter And that's a lot easier to show and pitch than a game that's, a little bit of concept art and somebody saying, this will be awesome in 2 years. Of course, not every game gets funded. In fact, about 2/3 of them don't. This is the distribution of unsuccessfully funded projects. 12% don't even get to the 1% mark. 67% get from the 1 to the 20%. Roughly 4,000 games were added to this category last year. But what's really interesting is all of these percentages, I had to double check, are exactly the same as the graph from last year. Meaning, literally, with 4,000 games added, they fell into the exact same ratio of how much money they didn't gather on their raise. And so this basically kind of says, this is solidifying on consumer response to Kickstarter and crowdfunding things. And if you look at it with a 2/3 failure rate and 79% of games only getting 20% or less of their ask, this basically means more than half the games raising money on Kickstarter, 53%, got no significant money. So game broadcasting and rebroadcasting in its myriad forms is now a big thing. I could do an entire talk on this, but sadly I don't have time this year, so we're going to show one slide. Competitive multiplayer continues to dominate viewership. Blue here is peak views, gray is average concurrent, which is what the chart is ranked by. League of Legends, Dota, Hearthstone, CSGO, FIFA, Overwatch, these were the top viewed games last year. And certain things can spike you in there. Community events, game launches, competitive tournaments, fundraisers, Twitch personalities. Those can get you up for a bit, but sustained views, however, are engaging competitive multiplayer backed by an engaged audience and compelling content. And this coincides a lot with some of the eSports tournament scene. We've seen tremendous growth since 2010 in the prize pool, where in 2010 it was 3.25 million. This year just under 80 million. Notably the prize pool per tournament's kind of grown at a very exceptional rate, also due to crowdfunding. Dota's The Invitational has been particularly interesting on that. So I'm going to wrap up this year with one of the biggest surprise hits of the year of Pokemon Go. And part of the surprise was the extreme virality boosted by the power of its brand. So on the virality aspect, this was a survey for where most people first heard about Pokemon Go, and the answer was from a friend. More than 1/3 of people who played Pokemon Go heard about the game from a friend. That is an amazing amount of virality. Number 2, read about it, and so you can kind of see it trailing down. App Store was the lowest percent. 5% found out about it from the App Store. So this was an actual phenomenon. As any of you who walk through Central Park or walk through, shopping malls filled with people looking at their phone and bumping into things, which again was awesome. But the other thing, the brand familiarity was also a major factor in the virality. In a crowded market, having a well-aligned, recognizable brand is a critical means of driving consumer awareness and interest. Broadly accessible IPs, Disney, Marvel, Candy Crush, they've historically seen the widest appeal. And more specific brands, celebrity, HD gaming, mobile brands, publishers, tend to be a little more niche in their appeal, with Nintendo and its flagship Mario IP being among the few exceptions, but they still hold very strong potential when aligned with gameplay. In the middle of a crowded market, finding a way to stand out and to signal value is vitally important to the success of your game. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present 6 years in a row awesome video game data. And speaking of success, I wish you all great luck out there.